from NJ.com. This is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
Welcome on in, Giants fans, to the latest episode of the Talk is Cheap podcast right here on NJ.com. As always, I'm Matt Lombardo, joined by my friend and colleague Zach Rosenblatt. And Zach, in a summer that nobody saw football coming way back in February or March, after a training camp where everybody kind of held their breath that we would all get through this, the NFL returns on Thursday night and the Giants kick off the 2020 season and the Joe Judge era on Monday at MetLife Stadium against the Steelers. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing great, man. I was out at Giants practice today, and we're going to talk about this in a second. But I appreciate Joe Judge for giving us something new to talk about every week, is what I'll say.
Yeah, every day it's something new, and you certainly saw something that, at least in my 9 or 10 years of covering the NFL, is unprecedented for me, and I'll let you kind of set the scene and tell the story. Before we get into what happened at practice on Thursday afternoon, before we look ahead to what this season might bring and certainly preview Monday night's season opener against the Steelers, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you like what you hear on the show, we would love if you would subscribe in the Apple Podcast Store, give us those 5-star reviews, let us know what you like, what you don't like. Follow us on Twitter. He's at Zach Blatt. I'm at Matt Lombardo NFL. And if you want to get in contact with us and not deal with Twitter and everything that goes with social media, you can sign up for the Giants Extra Text service at nj.com/text. So now that we got that out of the way, Zach, let's just zero in on what happened on Thursday, because you were there. You saw it all go down live. And it wasn't the first time that Joe Judge has halted practice, but it certainly seems like a very different practice ahead of a regular season game than anything that I've ever seen.
Yeah, so they have a weird schedule anyway because they have a Monday night game. So this isn't like going to be what the normal, like they would be starting to wrap up normally today, and then tomorrow would be a light one or whatever. But since they're playing Monday, it's different. But anyway, so we're out there at practice. The media were able to watch the warm ups and the like individuals in the beginning of practice before they start doing team drills and they kick us out. So they go through all those drills. Everything seems pretty normal on the surface. It starts to rain a little bit, and then as they kick us out, we hear Joe Judge gathers the team at the middle of the fields, and he starts laying into them. It was using some words that I would say we can't repeat on this podcast.
Yeah, if we want this to be a family podcast,
R-rated,
probably
this is a family podcast. Talk is cheap. It's also G-rated.
But you can't actually repeat a lot of the things that are said by Joe Judge on the field. I found that out pretty quickly throughout August during camp.
Yeah. So that goes on for a little bit, and then as we're leaving, we hear they have like the announcements for when they do a new period of stuff, and they went back to stretching. They went all the way back to the beginning of practice. And we all were like, is that what's happening right now? Like, we weren't 100% sure. We were pretty sure that's what it looked like. They were all lined up. They were all walking down the field. They were jogging. They were stretching. So Joe Judge literally restarted practice because he was upset with the way things went, which was confirmed by Blake Martinez and Saquon. So we talked to the coach before practice, which isn't ideal in a situation like this, but we talked to Saquon Barkley and Blake Martinez after, and they both confirmed that he restarted it from the beginning, which, I mean, that sounds like a high school coach thing, but I can't even imagine that's a common thing for high school coaches to do.
Especially when you look at the NFLPA and the collective bargaining agreement, you only have so much practice time, right?
Yeah,
you only have so many hours in a week you can be on the field.
He probably had to cut back the team drills later, like shorter. Because of that.
Yeah, and of course, we're not out there to see the full practice now that the regular season has started. It's not like training camp where you can be out there all day. But, Saquon Barkley made an interesting point that he loved it. He loved the intensity, and he said that, they wanted to get it right because there are no restarts on Monday night against the Steelers, and there is no restart in the middle of a game. Now, we don't know what went on to trigger this. We don't know what went on to upset Joe Judge. This happened, of course, during training camp, where he basically stopped practice with about 15 minutes to go in what was scheduled to be the practice, chewed into them, same thing, profanity-laced tirade, basically imploring his team to bring more energy, and then they finished strong over the final half hour. It's interesting that these are the type of things that he's doing, and I have a story coming out on Sunday, Zach, where I'm basically giving my 20 thoughts on the 2020 season, and a little preview for that is thought number one. and let me know if you agree with this or not, Joe Judge really has a limited window here, because it's one thing to come in and take the names off the back of the jerseys, have the players run laps, chew out Saquon Barkley in front of the media, run an Oklahoma drill, stop practice, and then restart it in the first 15 minutes. It's one thing to do that if you're Bill Belichick, or if you're Pete Carroll, or even if you're Andy Reid to a certain extent with one Super Bowl ring. If you have that winning pedigree, which Joe Judge doesn't have, it's one thing to treat players this way and in that regard, but to be a first-time head coach, and yes, he's worked for Bill Belichick, he's worked for Nick Saban, but he's not Bill Belichick or Nick Saban, that if they don't get results early, the window, in my opinion, is kind of limited for him to win over his team and keep this locker room united for an entire season based on how he has conducted this camp in these early practices.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. He doesn't do any of these things, I would think, assuming that it would get all the attention that it does. So he's doing all these things and it's getting national attention. Locally, the players are supporting it. There are some media members who support like his concepts and how he treats his team and all that stuff. But he's getting a lot of like negative attention league wide. And then on top of that, they're playing the primetime game on Monday night where everybody in the country is going to be watching them. And if they go out there and put forth a stinker against a good Steelers team, then it's going to be the top, whether fair or not. Like it's suboptimal for Joe Judge that his first game after a weird offseason is on primetime, because if things go poorly and Daniel Jones fumbles it, the offensive line struggles, they miss tackles, whatever.
Everybody sees it.
Everybody's going to jump on him and be like, so I guess it's another Bill Belichick clone that didn't work out, and that's not fair. But that's kind of like the attention that Joe Judge has drawn on himself and the Giants, and that's kind of part of the nature of being a coach in New York. Like, you're going to have more eyes on you. I'm sure he was aware of that when he took the job. He's committed to being who he is, which I guess is respectable. But at the same time, like it's drawing more attention to him to the point where if they have a really bad season, it's gonna feel like he's on the hot seat next year, whether the Giants and John Mara actually feel that way.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to couch all this by saying that he knows his football team a lot better being around them every single day than I do looking through the looking glass of seeing a couple minutes of practice and talking to players, when we have the chance to. But I will say this, that, hey, look, I gave him the benefit of the doubt that because this is a team that's only won 12 games over the last 3 years. It's a very young team. There aren't a lot of veterans that know any better and know that maybe this isn't what everyday life in the NFL is. All I'm saying is that if they start winning, if they pull off an upset against the Steelers, who have arguably the best defense in the league, or they go out to Chicago week 2 and they get a win there, and maybe they pick off the 49ers or they beat the Rams, even if you start 2-2, okay, that's one thing. You can kind of build on this, and that the team can look back to August and early September and say, we really came together during that slip inside fumble ball security drill, or, yeah, that really sucked to have to restart practice, prior to week 1, but it built character, and on and on and on. But if it goes poorly, if they get blown out on Monday night, which is a distinct possibility because the Steelers are a Super Bowl caliber team in the AFC North, if they get blown out and then they're 0-2 with a bad loss to the Bears in week 2 on the road, all I'm saying is that, players tune this stuff out pretty quick in the NFL. This isn't my first rodeo covering an NFL team, and I know it's not yours either, Zach, but players demand a little bit of respect and command a little bit of respect. And if they start losing, I don't know the guys are going to be so eager to run that penalty lap, or I don't know the guys are going to be so excited to restart a practice 15 or 20 minutes in October as they are on September 10th.
Yeah, someone you covered, I feel like almost they're close. Like Joe Judge is a pretty unique specimen, just the way he approaches this. But I would almost say the closest you can come is like Chip Kelly in terms of his approach to like being a hard ass. And, I think Joe Judge is way more likable. I think his players probably like him more than Chip Kelly's players like playing for Chip Kelly. Maybe, I could be wrong about that, but like you saw with Chip how quickly things flamed out. They had that first season in Philadelphia where they won 10 games or whatever it was, and everybody was all about Chip Kelly, and quickly that did not turn out the way it did. I'm not saying this is the direction it's going or anything, but just the idea that like you're creating a lot of scrutiny for yourself, and then if you go out and don't perform, then you're in New York and you're a national storyline where everybody's going to be talking about, I wonder what Joe Judge is going to do this week. Is he going to make them run laps in the middle of a game? Like everything's on the table with this guy.
And I'll go next level here, Zach. And I just had this thought pop in my head as you brought that up, that in a lot of ways, this is kind of twofold for Joe Judge, right? Because number one, he's setting the tone for his team and trying to install the culture that he doesn't believe that they had, and they probably didn't have under Pat Shermer the last 2 years. But number two, we're all sitting here talking about Joe Judge sending players running laps, right? And the Oklahoma drill and restarting practice. We're not talking about the fact that Daniel Jones got sacked 4 times in the scrimmage and fumbled twice 2 weeks ago. We're not talking about the struggles in the red zone throughout training camp that Daniel Jones experienced and sort of the growing pains that the offensive line and specifically the Jones-Nick Gates center exchange went through all summer long. Joe Judge has kind of become the story. And whether he means to become the story or not, the fact that he's been able to deflect a lot of potential criticism and diffuse a lot of possible storylines about concerns facing this team and some pretty important elements of this team at the start of the season, intentional or not, I think he deserves credit for kind of crafting this narrative on the outside and sort of taking the pressure and the focus off of some of the concerns for this team. And a lot of that has to do with the fact probably that fans aren't at practices. They're not seeing this. It's out of sight, out of mind. But the fact that he's kind of become the storyline takes a lot of pressure off of the players. And I think that that's the right move for a young team.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I should say, I don't even necessarily think he's doing the wrong thing or that he's a bad coach. He very well could be a very good coach and all of his methods could work.
For sure.
Like, just like putting it all out there that like there's a lot more scrutiny on him now. And if things don't work, then it's going to be interesting to see how the New York fan base embraces him, or because they all seem to be embracing his personality right now. The Bill Parcells, Tom Coughlin, and him, New York fans love. And we'll see how much they love it if it doesn't work this year. I mean, we're going to get into this, like looking at the season as a whole, but this is a rebuilding team. It's in the very beginning of a rebuild, I think. They have a lot of question marks. There's a lot of talent on this roster. There's a lot of players I'm very intrigued by, but there's also a lot of holes and a lot of question marks. So, like, this isn't going to – I don't see a scenario where this is a playoff team unless everything goes perfectly. And in that case, Joe Judge is going to win Coach of the Year. So, what expectations are, I'm not sure. It's probably somewhere in the 6 to 7 to 8 win range tops would be like the goal, I would imagine, for them. But if they don't get to that, I'm just curious to see like how the city responds to that.
Yeah, it's a very bizarre situation when you look at it in a lot of respects because, yes, it's absolutely a rebuild, and we can kind of transition to talking about the depth chart here. But you look at the offensive line, you're starting a rookie in Andrew Thomas at left tackle. You kind of have a Band-Aid at right tackle and Cam Fleming with another rookie, Matt Pert, who you took in round 3, really waiting in the wings, and I thought he came on strong in the month of August, and it's probably only a matter of time before Pert becomes the right tackle. Then you have Saquon Barkley entering his 3rd season and probably up for a big money extension this coming offseason. Golden Tate is a veteran receiver. Sterling Shepard, a veteran receiver. 5th-year option just picked up on Evan Ingram. But then you have a second-year quarterback. So you have some young pieces up front that are developing with the quarterback. And Zach, you know as well as I do that teams have a very limited window to win Super Bowls or make playoff pushes and build around a young quarterback on a rookie contract. And it's pretty critical that you lay the foundation when your quarterback is on a rookie deal. But that window is pretty slim as well, right? Because you have to pay Saquon this offseason. You're probably going to have to make a decision on whether or not to pay Evan Ingram this offseason. You have kind of an older wide receiving core, but you have a lot of holes and question marks on a very young defense and an offensive line that you have a 3rd-year, left guard in Will Hernandez, a rookie tackle, potentially another rookie tackle, and a veteran in Kevin Zeitler. So it's almost as if the Giants are finally slowly pulling the Band-Aid off on rebuilding, whereas if they would have just ripped it off 2 and 3 years ago, they might be in a much better spot today to push for a division title or more.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to relitigate the past, but like if they had stopped with Eli Manning sooner, they could have started the rebuild sooner, and they'd be closer to competing right now. That's for sure.
What were the big surprises for you on offense? Because I know that there were some surprise cuts really on both sides of the ball, but what really jumped out at you as this depth chart took shape on the offensive side?
The offensive depth chart isn't like there wasn't really any huge surprise. I think defense had some bigger surprises, I would say, if you just look at that first unofficial depth chart and what they did with the roster. Nick Gates, it seems like is going to be the Giants are waffling and acting like they haven't picked a starter yet. I think Nick Gates is pretty clearly going to be the starter.
Nick Gates came to the podium and held a press conference on Wednesday. We haven't spoken to Spencer Pulley on the podium. That's all I'm saying.
That's actually a great point. I didn't even think of that. And yeah, I mean, you look at the wide receivers are who they are. Corey Coleman was obviously a surprise cut for both of us, I thought. I'm going to be very interested to see how much like a guy like CJ Board plays, or if they just stick with 3 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, use 2 running backs every now and then. But generally, I think the offense was as expected. You mentioned Matt Pert. I agree with you. I think he's probably going to be starting by the end of the year. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in Cam